How's it going, everyone? Let's go ahead and wrap up this typewriter here. I think we could probably, hopefully, get this this frame done in this part. What we're going to be doing is taking care of this yellow area that we sort of forgot to touch on last part. We're going to be adding the sort of logo here to this location. And then we're also going to be doing sort of like the rust and dirt pass on all these upper parts of the frame that we've kind of left up until this point. So let's go ahead and just dive into that and turn off some of these layers that we're not going to be using right now. So we can just sort of focus in and have a clear idea of what we're doing. So let's just start with this yellow and kind of find in a reference what it is. To me, like, there's never any like super clear images, but it just sort of looks like some rounded piece of metal. So we can, we can do what we can to fit that in there. So we just have this yellow layer. We called it centered disk. And let's just go ahead and kind of plop in some kind of smart material and work it up. It seems to be silvery. If anything, we might be able to just reuse this, but in all the references, it seemed to be kind of like a different type of metal altogether. So I'm going to start with this antique silver and see if it gives us like a half decent result. I feel like it's going to be probably way too dirty. I know this this smart material has a pretty bad habit of just completely using the occlusion dirt like way too much. So let's just go ahead and let this load in, and we'll take a bit of a look at it and kind of go from there. Okay, so yeah, pretty much what I expected. Just a completely way too dusty area. I think it's this dirt layer that's usually the culprit. Yeah. It is nice to have that material separation in though, so I'm going to keep that. In fact, I might even decrease the saturation and make it like very clear that it's something different. Maybe we could even give it a cool tone. Don't want to go too crazy with it, but we'll see if we should work with that. Roughness. I think we figured out last time this isn't doing too much. The dirt, let's see if we can correct this a little bit. Like, I don't mind some dirt. I think it's a pretty natural place for it to occur. I also want the grunge to be up. I just never understood why this is black. I think it's just a little too dark. Let's get it more rusty, kind of on the same tone as what's around it. And that's already looking like pretty much like all I'm trying to accomplish with this. Darker, a little bit more saturated. Should probably tweak it a little bit more. Grunge scale. Turn the contrast down maybe. And then we could probably make it a little bit more. Yeah, like that's literally all I'm really going for. Dust, sure. And I think that'll do. Yeah, we can always come back to that. Let's focus in on this area though. I think this is probably a bit more important. Like, this is something we can fix later, and realistically, like as it is right now, I think it's pretty fine. So this is the metal frame layer, and if I'm not mistaken, we have this in our steel painted worn. I think I already made a layer for this. Maybe I did delete it for the time being, but no, it is this layer. So what I'm going to want to do is make a whole separate folder here for this specific kind of set of textures. So this is what we have right now. As you can see though, the font is a little wobbly. I was unable to find any like actual logo for this or any font for this or anything. So what I ended up doing was taking a screenshot of one of them and cranking the levels until it was all white, and just sort of like refine the mask a little bit. But it's really hard to do so, so we're going to have to scuff out a lot of the edges to kind of hide for that fact. And then this crest is just something I was able to find on Google Images and cut out. So I've shown you guys before how I set up my masks, and I've already just sort of gone ahead and done this off camera because it's a little bit redundant at this point. So we have this, which is in the same sort of layer as all this stuff. In fact, I'm going to start naming these, and I'm going to group them and mask them so we're only affecting this plate, because that's all we want. So Underwood logo, and let's go ahead and make a group here. Slap it in here and just call this the Underwood plate. And we can add a black mask to this. There we go. And we're only going to want it to be affecting this. So let's just grab this UV shell, click this, and we're good to go. So everything in this group is only going to be affected here. So this is our main layer. Just trying to get some good reference. Let's go ahead and start by setting up the color of this and the roughness. We're going to want this to be a little bit rougher than everything. It's like a painted on logo, so I think this is about right. Height we can probably raise very slightly, as if it's like a sticker or a layer of paint or something. The color, I suppose we could just nab from the other part, like over here. This on its own is looking a little dodgy. So we're gonna do what we did last time, where we make another layer with this mask, but change out the color for some kind of noise to get some more value on it. So let's go ahead and right-click duplicate layer. We have the same mask. All we're gonna want is a color layer on this though, and we can change this from base color to some kind of 3D Perlin noise or something. Turn the scale way down. And yeah, 3D Perlin noise is not doing it. I think from now on, like permanently, I'm just going to use blue noise. Or maybe just a grunge would be better for this. Just get some more random shapes, actually. I think noise is a little too uniform for this. Just some kind of dirt. Mess with the scaling a bit. Something where we're getting a variety of color. Set it to overlay. And we're getting some variety here. Maybe screen is better. Or maybe just normal and lower the opacity. We're just getting some highlights and shadows in there. But I think I'm just going to set it to overlay. Because it makes more sense that what's actually showing up on it is more grunge than anything. So there's that. I also have some other layers here. So that's the frame decals. I also have frame crest, which is this logo here. I found a high-res copy on Google Images, just typing in Underwood Typewriter logo. And I placed it where it should be on the UVs. Kind of like, this is just kind of like a placeholder. This is going to be placed directly on top. So I'm going to add a fill layer. Then for the base color, I'm going to put this frame crest. We're not going to want it to be repeating though. We're going to want this tiling once. And we are getting it on there. The problem though is that I had made the background completely black. So let's go ahead and open up that Photoshop file again and fix that a little bit. We're going to need the background to be transparent, or we're going to have a mask to accompany it, or it's not going to work. Simply because since the background is black, it's placing it in the right location, but it also has all this other information in the color channel, so we're going to have to find some kind of workaround. That shouldn't take too long though. All we're going to have to do is just make a quick mask for that. So let's bring in this Photoshop file, give it a second to read. And we can see we just sort of have it laid out here. All I'm going to do is take this, make it white. This is now a mask where we're going to want things that are white to appear and everything that's black to disappear. We can save this as frame_crest_mask. And give that a second, save it. Let it do its thing, and then we should be able to import that pretty easily into Painter and use it as a mask like we have been for pretty much everything else. Okay, let's load it in. Okay, and just sort of close that so it's not using a lot of background memory. And I'm just going to drag this in. Import to our current session. We can now give this layer a black mask. We can add a fill to it. And as you guessed, we can use this as our alpha. Just give it a second to load in. And yeah, we just have that logo there now. And not too bad. I'm gonna go ahead and close Photoshop because I don't want things to lag. I'm just trying to keep as little programs open as possible when working on this now. I think it might be easier to work on this with this in mind, actually. So I'm gonna go ahead and keep these guys on. Let's see. Let's rename this to crest. See how we have the layers affected. We can turn up the roughness on it. Turn up the height on it as well, like we did with the other. Not 0.01. It's very minuscule. It has a different roughness value, which is nice. Don't want it to be anything too crazy. And maybe I want this sort of gunk to be above it so we get some color variation. I think it might be worth lowering the opacity so it looks like it's a bit more faded. And then in general, this color seems to be a bit different than what we have here. So I might desaturate this and darken it as well. And then honestly, I think the height might even be a bit too much, so I might change it from 0.01 to 0.005 to cut it in half. So not too bad. We also have another mask for kind of like this outline that we put on everything else. So I'm going to go ahead and make that now by duplicating this. Right click and duplicate layer. I'm going to put this underneath and call it outline. Let's just change this to dark and desaturated. And then I'm going to bring it in frame decal borders. I can't remember what I named it. We already have borders, so I think it's frame crest background, I believe. Let's try this guy out. It's just like what we did before, where we just expanded the borders on it and used that as our mask. So we covered that in the last part. And I think we're seeing it. Yeah, okay. So it kind of seems like in the reference it's kind of like a dark, barely visible, maybe even no height information. Let's just get rid of that. It's very subtle. I think that's doing it pretty good. I don't know, actually. I think it could probably be pushed a little bit more. So I'm going to dive back into Photoshop and just expand it just a little bit. And then this way I can also show you exactly how I've gone about doing it. So let's bring this guy in. And let's turn off ruler. We're not concerned with that right now. That's the background. This is the shape. So yeah, once again, all I'm going to do is control click this so we get a selection of everything in here. I can then go to selection, modify, expand, and expand it by, say, 2 pixels. I'll just do another 2. And then with white in our foreground, we can hit Alt backspace and we'll fill our entire selection with whatever color we have in the foreground. I'm also seeing we're getting some pop-ups here. Once again, this masking job was a little imperfect, but either way we can go ahead and save that. And when we reload it, it should hopefully be going pretty good. So reload that guy. And once again in our mask, we can plop them into the corresponding slot. And yeah, so that's much thicker. So we can do quite a bit with that. I'm going to make it a bit brighter. Kind of make it this like gray. And it might be worth reinvestigating this height. 0.01. Might be a bit much. 0.006. 0.002. I don't want to make it too apparent because it is a bit of a wonky job. So I think we're going to really have to scuff this up to sell this as best as we can. So we have this here. This is the layer containing all of this. We can then add a paint layer to it and start sort of scrubbing away. Going to go to our brushes and grab our mold brush again and see if we can kind of mimic this like chipping, maybe not chipping, but kind of like the look of it being kind of stripped away over time. Kind of like this. It definitely looks like it's cracking. So maybe this isn't the correct brush, just because if we... no, definitely not. Let's go ahead and add a fill. No, that's not correct. I only want to affect this without it sort of projecting on everything, so I might even make a bold move here and place this group in another group simply for masking purposes. And we can just call this sort of Underwood logo where. And this way we can ensure we're not affecting anything else except for this logo in the group. So let's try and find a smart mask in which it has this sort of like crackled effect on it. I think paint old might have a good, like this, like chipped paint damage, because that's essentially what this is, right? So let's go ahead and give that a shot and mess with it a little bit. Turn the wear up. Wear contrast. Okay, grunge scale is definitely going to be an important one here. Okay, I'm liking these crackles for sure. Turn the contrast down. It's really attacking these edges here, so I'm going to turn the curvature down, because I definitely don't want it to be completely gone. Okay, we're getting a similar effect to this, but it's not quite quite there. We might want to turn the grunge scale down a bit. It's kind of like a happy medium in here somewhere. It might be worth adding a paint layer and like restoring some of this. I don't want it to look too uniform. But I definitely like the idea of a lot of it being worn, especially kind of like this badge, but maybe not quite that much. I'm also starting to think this background layer is a little too much, but let's go ahead and just let this save, and we'll deal with it in just a moment. Okay, so yeah, let's clean this up a little bit, tone back a lot of the damage, and after looking at the reference for a little bit, there's definitely some different directions we should take this. Starting with this thick border, I think we could do a lot to make it a little less obvious and lower the opacity on it. But I think to make it obvious in its own ways, we could increase the roughness by a bit, so it still pops. Another thing to notice is even with that damage being kind of scattered, it immediately kind of negates the fact that the logo is a little wonky. It justifies it completely, so I'm really happy with that. Areas like this, though, the border is getting a little much, and I'm wondering if that's the roughness that's doing it. So I'm going to tone that down. But back to this. I don't mind some scuffs, but we got to keep it within reason, right? I kind of like some areas having like directional damage and some cracks, so I'm not here to completely erase it, but big uniform blobs like that just look a little procedural. We don't want things to look like they were automatically done by a computer. So keep things to the edges is a good way to help with that. This is fine, we've already taken care of it. This, like the gradient, isn't done very well. And then we can also just like go to black, and then in some areas actually take away. So you want to just sort of like focus on chipping out a corner. And I'm sure we can find a better brush for this. I think we saw some cracked brushes earlier. Cracks. That might actually be really good for this. That might be a little forced. Let's just undo these. But in some areas like this, it might be kind of natural. This is definitely cracked in the reference, but I think it's a bit more subtle, right? More like just in the thin areas. It's probably a good place to target. This is a bit of an exception. We could probably layer this on a little bit more. I'm just trying to keep it where we might actually see some legitimate crack damage on it. See if any of these other brushes are a little bit more appropriate to use here. This one seems a little bit better actually. Just the pattern seems a little bit more sporadic. Definitely need to keep it subtle though. Just like edges, paint's chipping along it. And we might be overdoing it. I'm going back to the mold brush to really sort of reel back in some areas. I think once again I don't want anything to be too consistent, so bring back some of that. And I still think this border is a little problematic. Yeah, it might have just been the opacity being a bit much. I want it to be noticeable, but just like barely. I think the color is something that can also be adjusted a bit more. And yeah, that's looking pretty nice. This is the crest. I think the crest looks a little bit more faded here. So let's add a filter to this guy. Right click, add filter. And we can probably do a hue, saturation, lightness one, HSL. And we can turn the saturation way down. And it's starting to look like this now, where it's a lot more faded. It's starting to look a lot more aged. It's really fitting in with this color tone a bit more. Especially the yellows are matching. Hue, yeah, we're definitely not messing with that, obviously. But lightness, maybe... No, we're not going to have it like sun-dyed. I just think that matches it a lot more already. I do also want to change this kind of like grunge overlay that we added. I think it's a little too soft. I think maybe one of the problems is the scale isn't very good. This is the only part of the mask where we have like this much exposed text, so it's hard to know what to do. But you can definitely see like some white and dark splotches all across this, so we're definitely heading in the right direction with it. Just don't want it to be too obvious, like some of that's a bit much. But I think if we lower that, it might help, but no, this is still a little too much. And I guess messing with the scale might help a little bit. Maybe 1.5 is like a happy middle ground. And then I honestly think we're most of the way there. I just think we can probably scuff this up to look more like this. In order to do so, what I'm going to do is add a new fill layer here. And I'm going to call this cracks. I'm going to add a black mask to this guy, add a fill, and we're just going to have this as kind of like a mask of cracks, or I guess a good thing to use would be cells. There's a bunch of different cells that look like cracks. We can use this as just like a general overlaid group of cracks. I believe it is this set of cells. Oh, it's very large, that's what it is. Now let's scale it by... Okay, maybe that's not what we're looking for. Let's use this. Yeah. We can scale it way more, like 20. And you can see we can like overlay this onto here. I think in order to do that, we're gonna have to put it a group up. Does this change anything? I just want it to be masked to this layer, but also have the cracks. So let's just put this in a folder. Call this crack mask. Give this guy a black mask, and then we can mask just the this guy here. Sorry, I'm having a brain fart right now. So I'm just adding a fill like we've done a million times, and let's see, we're going to be wanting this mask, so it's over top of these guys, and we can now sort of affect this a bit more. This layer is the actual cracks. Balance doesn't seem to do anything. Neither does contrast. I think we're going to add a filter to this, which is going to be a warp, just to give it a little bit more randomness. Turn it down a little bit. .08 might be a good middle, or maybe 0.2. Just experimenting with it. 0.4. Yeah, that's a nice little fractured look over everything. I do want this to be inverted though, where it's like these little cracks over everything rather than like little islands. And with this, we can go back to our values. We can turn the height down to 0, or have it like cutting in and do a negative value of 0.001. So it's very subtly cutting in. minus 0.01. We can turn the roughness up. We can make it darker. And you can kind of see what I'm going for here. If we turn the opacity down, it gives us this kind of like fractured, crinkled look. And we can try a bunch of stuff with this. I might even want to tile it more. Not that much more, but like 25. Or maybe less is more in this case. I think so. Kind of want the height to be a little bit more. Might be a bit too much. And from here, in this group above it where we have it masked, we can just add a paint layer. More or less scrub it off of everything. And kind of target it in certain areas. Like even here, I don't mind leaving a little bit. And I'll return to the areas that I completely erased and add a little bit of it. But it's just good height information. It looks like it's paint that's chipping at the edges. Like this is a little bit too much since there's two parts that are really close. But I'm just going to leave a little bit in there and not completely erase it. You can see it adds a nice little crinkled edge. This is a little bit too much, so we're really going to tone down most of this. But just leaving some in the middle. So if we turn this on and off, it's adding some crinkled height information. But you can see like too much of it in one place is a little ridiculous. Like in this area it's too much, here is definitely too much. I don't want this paint to look like it's on the verge of turning to dust, but like a little bit in there is, I think, pretty cool looking. Especially on these edges here. They're doing a pretty good job of adding some height variety. So just sort of scrubbing most of it out. But still think it's doing its job pretty good. So yeah, it's just some height information around the edges. And of course we can go back in and target some areas. I still think this might just be a bit too much on some of these edges. And we're seeing it with this kind of like height reflection. I want it to be more of like an accent than kind of like the main look, right? I feel like the roughness on this is a bit high. Like I want it to be rougher, but not like a ton rougher. kind of want to work on some of these edges a little bit more now. I like how some of these have like big chunks taken out. I think I need a much more harsh brush to do this, but I think it could benefit us quite a bit to chunk a little bit. I wonder if there's any brushes that literally just are called chunk. Impression chunk, cloudy chunk. We can try cloudy chunk. It's not exactly what I'm looking for. This one looks much more aggressive. I kind of like some of these big harsh cutouts. I don't want it to be too severe if I'm doing something like that. Like that looks too expected. Yeah, not a fan of that. Maybe something a bit more like that. I can work with that. I want like at least one part to be like a really large, like whoa. So that's definitely been worn out. We could even bring the value up a tiny bit so we get like a little vague imprint of it there. And this D, I didn't really mask out too well, all things considered, so I think if I were to chunk a little bit of this out, it would be probably for the best. I still think this looks a little forced. I think if I add in a couple more scuffs to it, I might look better. And then this damage would probably continue and catch the edge of this, whatever sort of like came into contact here. I just don't want it to look too uniform. I'm just scared that this is looking a little like overdone, I guess. So I'm gonna bring back some areas. Same here, just like even that I think looks quite a bit better. I'm trying to catch just kind of like the lip of this. It's kind of nice to have it very directional. And I'm just going to go back and do one last pass on like a crack style. Maybe experiment with some different kinds. This one looks very directional, which could be cool to kind of almost do something like that where I go across everything, but I think it's a bit too obvious. I think I'll just end up doing something like this. And then these small guys are likely to be cracking the most, right? Same with these edges, are probably very brittle and easy to crack because they're so thin. Just making sure we're on the right layer here. Turning the hardness up on these and really scuffing them up. Okay. This is looking a little obvious. Gonna bring some of that back. Same with that, that's really nice. Same with that. This is good as like a restoration brush to kind of have like some of these like tiny pieces that are barely hanging on. Okay, I think we'll leave this logo for now because we can always come back to this and work on it, and I might just sort of adjust the mask a little bit here and there. Who knows, but I think I do want to continue and kind of deal with the rest of this upper stuff that we've kind of neglected, because I also wanted to do that in this part. So I kind of wanted to go through this whole metal frame layer and sort of like touch up some of these top areas and sort of adjust them all and all the masks and add some more custom damage to them based on how we see them a bit more in our reference here. So let's go ahead and go through and do that. Let's go ahead and save first, and then yeah, just kind of touch up those areas with these layers we already have set up. Alright, so let's get to adjusting some of these maps here. I'm going to start, let's see, start at the paint peeling layer, and we're going to affect the way that this paint is sort of kind of chipping, like how we set up these gashes here. If I can remember where that layer exactly is. Paint peeling. Getting quite a stack of layers here. Let me just pull this over a little bit. Paint peeling system, so it's somewhere in here. Do we open this up? Yeah, so it's this layer here. Looking at our reference, I like we have big sort of cuts and general wear and tear along this top bar, so we can start with that. We've already done a little bit here, but let's continue it. Go back to our mold brush, and let's go ahead and push it a bit further. Usually when we start using this, it's a little bit slow to warm up, but we can expect it to get a little bit faster, right? Have it here, coming down around the edge. Continue it over a little bit. Looks pretty nice to have like a little bit more damage on this guy. Can have some up here. Like even that, I think is pretty nice. Continue it around the edge. It's looking pretty good. It's adding quite a bit of wear, and it's matching the reference quite a bit more. We can find some of these spots and chip away at it a little bit. It's a good shape. Maybe just have it casually creeping across here a bit more. And just like before, I'm using like a not completely white opacity, just so that I can get it to be more subtle and have a little bit more control with it overall. But having it chipping and creeping across, we sculpted in some more damage here into our normal map, so let's take advantage of that. And then once again on the ends, we have some nice normal map damage details that we can take advantage of. And this is kind of how our reference presents paint damage on this thing, especially on these tight corners where paint's easily going to chip and crack. Okay. The one thing I just want to make sure is it's not too similar to exactly how this is set up. So this one I'm going to have a bit shorter on one end. Just so it's not super uniform, right? I'm also noticing scratches all over this thing, but we're quite a ways from the scratches layer, but it's just good to see them now so we can kind of make a mental note to come back to them later on. But I'm liking what that damage is adding, and I don't mind even carrying this along pretty far because we have some damage in here sculpted directly into that normal map, so just creeping it along. Not too bad. I think it's adding a lot. It's really helping sell this kind of wear here. We have this area. Our reference shows that this would have a bit of chipping wherever it's round. That might be a little bit too much, but we can maybe use it to our advantage and then tone it down a bit. Yeah, honestly not bad. I'm just gonna kind of get it further away from this area because this is like a little much. Our UVs are a little bit stretched here if I remember correctly. And then it's too uniform. They're spaced apart too evenly, so just going to tone them down and then maybe carry this guy over a little bit more. just looks very square, so I think I'm just going to try and guide it a little bit forward. Okay, I'm cool with that. Moving back, this bar here, and the reference seems to have a lot of damage where it's been sort of chipped away. So hopefully, yeah, we've added in some spots, actually in our sculpt, where we can take advantage of and chip the paint off of. I'm going to do some really big sort of cuts into this part, just because this whole area, there's really nothing going on for quite a while. Like at the front where there's a ruler, there's more visual information, but here there's just nothing. So we need something to break it up. This is not only breaking up like the color, but it's breaking up the shape and the roughness. It's doing a lot for our visual interest. Maybe do a little bit over here since we're having it be a little bit more rusty anyways. Kind of blends in with the material we already set up pretty naturally. Okay, let's just focus on this bar and we'll work our way back layer by layer. So quite a bit of rust here as well. Okay, it's looking pretty close to our reference, how it's set up. These shapes are a little strange, so I might push it a bit further to kind of get some more organic shapes. These look very like spiky. It's a bit better. I like how it's blending a lot. And then we have nothing in the front, so maybe we should find an area that we think could take it, and I think right here might be a good spot. It's kind of sandwiched between these two, so it adds some interest, right? And then here we could just have like a little small chip or something. We could probably go to these corners and give them the same treatment as what we did here, where it kind of makes sense for these guys to be worn down a bit. Carry this down a little bit. We went ahead when we were sculpting our high poly to sort of ding up these corners a little bit, so we might as well take advantage of that and give it an excuse to sort of chip some paint along it. This looks like it might be a little bit too much the more I look at it. Let's try and tone it back a bit. Okay, I'm a bit happier with that. Right here we have a little bump. We could add a little something there. Just even the color variation goes so far, right? It's really coming together now with all this colors and dust and layers, and it's adding quite a bit. Let's see how they handle this. So this whole edge is kind of chipped and it climbs up a little bit. I think that's kind of cool. You can try and mimic that by doing something like this, and we're going to have to tone it back quite a bit. Yeah, it's a little extreme. Let's lower the size of this. And just sort of focus on this first. And then we can have it sort of carry along here. Okay. And then we don't want it to just be affecting one side, so we can probably have some of it climbing up here. A bit more at the bottom. Carry this to the edge. We've already gone ahead and shipped it in the sculpt. Okay, nice. Everything else is a lot harder to see from reference because a lot of this stuff is covered. Like if we bring this in, pretty much everything else is completely covered, so it's not too important to add a lot of detail to it. I might affect this back bar and then kind of like the fronts of this, but I'm not going to go too far past that. So let's deal with these first. So I'm going to count this as kind of like part of the top. Just kind of get a little chunk out of here. And it might look good to carry it down to underneath. I think it might just be a bit too much at the bottom. I'm going to reel that in a bit. Yeah, I kind of like the height, but I think it's a bit much. Yeah, let's just leave it at pretty much that. This bar, though, we can definitely do some work on this. And this is kind of mostly all I'm really aiming for with this. I suppose we could probably go for the more chunked out rust under the screws that we've been doing. But there's no point in really going too crazy with this because none of this is really too visible, right? There's stuff constantly covering this. Get a bit of the back in case we get some kind of overview angle at some point. then maybe just something in here crawling up. And then once again, I think the screws deserve to have the same treatment as the rest. Okay. Now once again, we have like these where I just don't think they need too much attention. I'm gonna basically do like the screw treatment, and that's probably it. Simply because we just straight up don't see a lot of this stuff. So let's just give this some crazy damage. And this just looks a little silly actually. I'm gonna pull it back. Yeah, that's a bit better. And then this one as well. That looks pretty bad. Let's just target the top. No. We can just get rid of this one. So yeah, I think all that's really left is more these bars. And it's too close to this. I don't want this to be like overly done, right? I want this to be more subtle. So let's maybe pull it a bit further away. And even that, I think it's starting to look a little forced if we do it too much. Maybe attempt to do it down here. I think that might be a bit of a better way to approach it. But this height, we didn't completely get rid of it, so let's clean it up. Might look better on the inside. Let's do that, and then we'll chunk out this little divot that we made. I'm even going to tone this down. And then I don't mind actually like going ham on the edges here, kind of like what we did on the front, and just have it wrap around. I think that might be a happy medium. Because it actually makes sense for the paint to be chipped here. We're not just adding it for the sake of adding it. Even though that looks a little strange. Let's continue it further to get rid of this really obvious height bump. Okay, that looks better. And then I don't think we'll have to add anything here unless we just want to do like a really subtle brush over and see if it does anything. Sure, we'll keep it. As for this side, probably a similar story where we don't want to do too much. We could crisp up this edge though, since it's just one big corner. And then this edge as well. And I think that'll probably be where we leave the paint chipping. At least, well, we might want to revisit that back plate actually that we were working on at the start. Like this guy here, is he gonna have any? Do we see any in the reference? Suppose we see some at the top. I guess it would make sense where it's nice and round up here. Let's go ahead and save those since we haven't done that in a while, and I feel like we're sort of playing with fire now. Okay, let's do some chips maybe along the top here, and then we'll target some corners and sort of work our way through it. See if this is kind of something we want. Yeah, actually I think that looks really good. We haven't really used this brush on like a nice long area or anything like that. We are having this texture shine through though, so maybe we should use it on areas where it's kind of scratched off. But I really think it's adding a lot. That's actually turning out way nicer than I thought it would be. And it kind of makes sense for it to be here because this is like a big plate where we're constantly like feeding paper into it and there's always friction. And it also looks nice to have like a big empty plain surface have some variation added to it. So with this, I added a big chunk, and I think it looks kind of unnatural to just have one big chunk on its own, so I'm going to try and add a little something to the side to really make it feel a little less lonely. This whole area, though, I don't think is very seen at all, so I don't mind. In fact, I should probably turn this layer on to see what's actually like going to be picked up. Like that down there will never get picked up now that I see it like this. Maybe we could target some sides. And I really don't want to get in the territory of adding wear for the sake of wear, so I'm going to pull this back a bit. Let's see if there's any areas where we'd actually expect it. Like along here we have this thing sliding, that's why this is getting scratched up. So we could maybe even add more here. And then maybe we could experiment with the idea of having some here. that like little dollop in the middle looks a little weird to me. Yeah, let's just tone that back. So I have a little bit, but I think that scratch adds a ton. It's kind of a very nice happy accident. And then we can just see if maybe like adding a splotch somewhere does anything. Kind of. It's like on the right track, but I think it's a bit forced. A little on the nose. Let's just get rid of that. Don't want it to be like too much of a good thing. We really kind of had a home run with it there. As far as the back, I guess we could do a similar treatment where we scratch up the back here. Then maybe a little bit over here. Just don't want to make it too uniform. And then the end we can do a bit more. Might be too much in some of these areas. And just sort of like clicking to like dab it back into place. I think I went a little too overboard here. Okay. Cool with that for sure. So let's move up past all this through our paint peeling system. Surface imperfections we don't need to mess with. Height bump we don't need to mess with. Speckles, no. Water damage speckles, unless we're looking to add some subtle variation here. Not really needed. In fact, we can actually turn this off. Scratches. Scratches is something that we definitely needed to tone down in a lot of these areas. I remember seeing quite a few along the front that seem a little over the top. We don't need a scratch there, it doesn't make sense. Very strange places for some scratches. Up here, I don't mind a lot of these since it's such an empty bar, but once again, like, it's not the Wolverine's typewriter. We're not expecting it to be totally mangled. This big plate, I kind of like it, just to break it up a bit. Like, that is a really nice one. We might not need every single one of these, but even the reference kind of has it set up that way. And we can now move up to rust occlusion. So I think we toned this down in a lot of ways for some of these things. So we can now bring it back. Give it a second to load in and do its thing. So obviously that's not what we really want. This is mostly kind of like a way to add color variety into things. So I might, for example, like go here and sort of brush it in. It also, if we go to our roughness view, adds in a different roughness, which is really nice. So it might be like good to sort of go along the bottom and then kind of erase out so we get some more sporadic patterns. Keeping our values very low. We don't want to overpower this. It'd be very easy to kind of go overboard immediately. Might do the same up top, over some of the text, and then once again turn the value to 0 and really pull it back in. As for this area, I think it might be good to give it a healthy dose kind of around the base, especially where we have some of this chipped paint. It kind of makes sense to pile some of this up. Do it along the base here, and areas like this would probably pile up a bit. Very subtle, just keeping the values very low, but we really don't want to go overboard with this, right? Just kind of using it as a way to reinforce the damage we did before. These areas here are pretty boring, so I'm just going to add some roughness variation to them. We can actually go back to scratches and probably pay a bit more attention to a lot of these parts that we kind of skimmed over. Once again, anything on the interior we're not really going to get scratches for, so maybe I should have paid attention to this a bit more. Okay, back to the rust. Getting some of that in here, really around some of these crevices or anywhere that we already have some kind of rust. We can probably move on to the next rust occlusion, which I think is the same thing. I don't think we're going to have to do anything with this layer. I just think it's a slightly more powerful rust, if I'm not mistaken. So we just sort of target some areas where we want it to be a bit more powerful. Like right here, I might want it to creep up a little bit more. Or some of these areas where it's like larger gashes. I might just touch up the odd supporting spot. And just sort of going back and forth between the layers, like scratches here. I'm going to tone back. But like not too much to comment on here really. It's just continuing along what we've already done, just working our way up. Occlusion dirt. It could be nice to pile on some dirt mainly on like these big plates, or this big plate. I just don't want to take away from the rust too much. Look at medium value in here. Some collecting at the top too. The dust just is gonna essentially rest on top of everything. That's all it really does, right? And the corners on top. And crevices in areas like this. Pretty much this whole thing is fair game. But what it isn't fair game for is scratches. Nothing is really going to touch this ever. So that's that. Then we have dirt speckles. We can paint some of these in. Not making too much of a difference. And then dirt blobs, probably also not going to make too much of a difference. I'm not messing with the generator because it's affecting everything else. But I think we have some dirt blobs here. It seems like it's taking a second to load, so let's let it do its thing. We have some kind of dirt here. Yeah, okay, so that is dirt blobs. Let's change our value higher and bring these back in. I like this. It's adding quite a bit of surface variety here. I don't want it to be too uniform, but like that's kind of how it is here. It's just very caked on. Like I might even make the value white and then chunk it out in some areas. Kind of like it piling at the bottom and kind of underneath this ledge. Just not too much. Rust spots, I think we might have painted them all off of here, but we can definitely bring some of these back. Little cuts of rust. Kind of chunking it in a little bit more. As for these other areas, I'm not too concerned about adding these here. I think they already have enough damage and chips. Kind of went a little overboard with them realistically. Ooh, this is like a ton of scratches here. Kind of unnecessary, right? Same with that. Then we have this sort of bump mask, which is just kind of like the bumpiness that we added. I think for this we're using a standard brush though. So I'm setting this all back to the default settings. As for our alpha, once again, just sort of a shape brush, turn it down relatively low, and this is what's just adding like some bumpiness to the height. So this could be good maybe around some of the text. Maybe if it's like a really low value, it'd be good around the text. But I just kind of like it for areas around the corners to use as like a kind of a noise. Just like a way to break up the height. Like I might turn it up here. And just give things some type of variety. Like where I think it would be really good would be kind of like these flat surfaces. Like we're adding some bumps. Just something to really break it up a bit. Yeah, we're doing a pretty good job of kind of wrapping this up. One of the last things I want to do is I think we have a big dirt blob here. Yeah. So I just kind of want to paint it out a little bit. I might keep like a subtle amount, but that's about it. But I think that'll do it for this part. I might, like I said, adjust where it says Underwood a little bit off of camera, but I think we covered quite a bit in this part, and everything else is redundant. It's just sort of adding different paint values to the masks, and that's pretty much it. Maybe the only thing I'd want to check before wrapping this up is kind of the underside here of this, but I think this would naturally get pretty dusty. Is this, yeah, dirt blobs. We could probably just paint this out a little bit. This is a weird one because it's also like pretty much no one will also see this, right? But we should still give it attention. We've barely poked our camera under here at all as it is, so. Oh, right, scratches. If we're down here, there really shouldn't be any scratches on the bottom. That's what the feet are for, to prevent this from dragging along anything, especially parts like this. Doesn't make any sense. Got to think about this very logically, right? Especially areas like in there, it doesn't make sense. But I think that'll do it for this part. Like this is the frame is well, to be honest, I guess the frame is done. We're gonna be moving on to the inside, and that's kind of the end of the texturing. So like if we put our keys in place, like this guy is like, he's mostly there. This part is going to take a little bit of time. There is quite a bit going on, and yes, I haven't masked it out, but a lot of these are just solid metals. Like there is no decal work. Like the frame took a long time, the keys took a long time. It's because we had custom masks to do, but this has none of that. So it'll probably take a lot less time. But like I said, I'll probably polish up a little bit of this, some of the values on the mask. But like, look at this. Like this is coming along really great. I've been getting some feedback from some friends off of camera. They've been pointing out some things that are really useful. We are definitely getting there. Give yourself a pat on the back, and yeah, we will be diving into the inside in the next part. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you then. See ya.